Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast with Richard Jacobs.
Quick note before we begin, the Finding Genius Foundation, as part of the Finding Genius Podcast, has recently completed a book about understanding viruses. So the creation of this book was to interview 100 virologists, ask them a lot of deep, difficult questions, take the most difficult questions, and then re-interview the top 25 or so and ask them the hardest questions I could think of. And we compiled that all into a book. So you'll see question and 4 or 5 experts' answers. Question, 4 or 5 experts' answers. There's about 30 questions in the book. I think it's a great read for the layperson and for the researcher. It talks about a lot of speculation in the world of viruses, such as are they alive or not, and why is it important? Why do viruses go latent or hidden or ineffective or sit in a person or an animal or another creature for weeks, months, years, and then suddenly become virulent and affect that person? So there's a lot of really provocative questions in the book. It's now on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and type in Finding Genius, you'll see the book on viruses. It's also on Kindle. The Audible version is in production and should be ready in approximately a month. But if you want to go and order it now, you can do so again by going to Amazon or Kindle, or go to findinggeniusfoundation.org and go to publications. There's an opportunity as well to get the transcripts of all the interviews and to hear the original interviews themselves. If we put them all together, the book would be about 1,000 pages, but we condensed them down to make it juicy and concise and tight and very interesting. So I hope you'll check out the book. We're now working on one about cancer, but this is going to be our goal is 3 times a year to come out with these masterclass books that I think will inspire new scientific research, and I hope you'll check it out. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now a part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Felix Cao. He's a neuromarketer, founder of Happy Buying Brain. The website is happybuyingbrain.com, and Felix helps companies apply brain activity measurement strategies to measure their buyers' responses to specific products or packaging or advertising and marketing. So, Felix, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on the show, Richard. I definitely appreciate it.
So are you the one that helps everyone and manipulates them into buying stuff, or is it more benevolent than that?
Oh, of course, it's benevolent. Neuromarketing is seen as another tool, right? So the whole point of it is to always to add value to people's lives and to solve pain points in order to help people become better versions of themselves. And I think that's an everyday thing that, consumers are looking to strive for.
Is there anyone that's using, brainwave imaging to study customer service so that they can improve that? I know that the buying they've been focusing on, but customer service, unfortunately, I think needs some help. I
think, customer service is always a focal point for any company in terms of how do you build those relationships and importantly nurture it. There's certainly, especially in today's age of instant gratification, people are looking for fast ways to communicate, and that's very important, especially in the digital era, where people want responses pretty much on the spot. So one of the things that we've noticed that a lot of companies are implementing on their digital platforms is the use of chatbots. So that's something that's very fascinating because that provides the company to reply instantly to the consumers, because that could be the difference between a satisfied customer looking to carry forward with the purchase versus, a frustrated consumer that could potentially take their business somewhere else.
So how did you get into studying, I guess, the neuropsychology of buying? What got you interested in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually the journey is totally different. If you and I were to have this conversation 20 years ago, the initial, you'd find me in post-secondary university studying biological sciences and psychology. And the initial aspiration was actually enter the medical field, more specifically the field of optometry, because I always had a fascination with the visual system within the human body. So that kind of carried forward years into the post-secondary, and then things kind of took a twist, but the twist for the better, and started to had a friend that introduced us to more of the world of business. So that was totally different, because now instead of just being all theory based, which we learned in school with all the books and everything, now you're going out and you're interacting with real people And a lot of the stuff that you learn, obviously, in books, it's, it's when it gets applied, it's not always translates the way that that people expect it to, right? But there's emotions and other things that factor into the decision-making process. So, after getting introduced to the business world, really got introduced with the more of the finance, investment, and insurance side of things. Self-employment was, a very important transition point. Did that for a few years, and then came across another group of friends that were more technology-based minded, and from the early 2010s for nearly a decade, spent that time in the tech and mobile space. And what I really started to notice was just like how we saw in the early 2000s that the internet was taking over, and then 10 years after that, in 2010s, you had the introduction of your mobile phones, the smartphones and the tablets start to really revolutionize the way that we live and work and play. And what I see today is actually we're at the cusp of another tech revolution, moving more towards artificial intelligence, machine learning, and virtual reality. And the thing that I noticed about that was at the core of a lot of these innovations, whether they're chatbots or let's say voice command technology that people use on a daily basis on their iPhones with Siri and Alexa, for example, if they have an Amazon product. A lot of those innovations at the core are based on neuroscience. So looking beyond just the field of technology is we're looking to see how the field of neuroscience could be applied to other industries as well. And that's when, the marriage between neuroscience and business and marketing came to light as well. So it's a combination of, educational background with, over a decade of business experience combined with the timing of where, things are moving at this particular moment. And especially with what's gone on over the last 12 months, brands are looking for more, better ways to understand their consumers, and also how do they connect with them and engage with them on a digital platform as, a lot of things continue to move online.
All right. So what are some of the uniquenesses of the way people interact now with businesses? What are you studying? What are you trying to optimize and improve?
Yeah. So the one thing is, so when it comes to the brain, obviously everyone's familiar with the logical side of the brain, right? So that's more your cortex, the part that kind of sits on the top closer to your scalp. That's more rational. It deals with things such as like data, figures, and facts. But what we're finding right now is because of all this uncertainty that's going on, and there's a lot of people in general are in a state of heightened anxiety, uncertainty, and they're looking for stability in their lives, right? And as we could see from the panic buying of certain items such as toilet paper, there's a lot of kind of irrational type of behaviors going on at this particular moment simply because of the circumstances. So how does a brand now position themselves? Because a brand really is just a verb or an emotional state. So if we look at consumers in terms of where they're at in an emotional state, the part that we focus on in terms of for neuromarketing is what we call the primal brain, right? So the primal brain deals more with understanding situations in terms of threat, non-threat, emotions, and social situations. So, together that the reptilian brain, the midbrain comprises the primal brain. And right now the primal brain of the consumer, people in general, are just in this hyper intensive state of anxiety, uncertainty. There's a lot of, panic and fear as well. So now brands, their job, since they're seen as an emotional state, how do they now enter their lives of the consumer to restore, calmness and balance and stability, and to remove a lot of that turbulence that's happening right now that's really causing a lot of havoc and chaos in terms of where people see their lives going or what has transpired over the last year or so.
Are you focusing on helping retailers, in a pandemic environment, or is just in general? I would think you've been doing this for many years. Like what are some examples of brands that really are doing it well or that have changed and now they're engaging much better with their customers?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think the main thing is how do you make the consumer right now, because they feel very there's a lot of instability, uncertainty, and just a lot of turbulence in their life. So how do you make them feel safe, right? So that's the absolute key right now, and connect with them in a way that's time relevant. So companies that are actually focusing more on, say, bringing back the nostalgic feel of triggering memories of, let's say, their childhood, is something that seems to be something that's very effective and common in terms of brands and of their brand messaging of how they want to connect with their consumers. So just taking up this, allowing or empowering the consumer to now take them back into place where, let's say in their childhood, where they felt like safe with their parents or their grandma, for example, or reliving a certain memory in their childhood where they felt that everything was all right. I think that's right now one of the main themes that are going on that really highlights how brands want to position themselves to be the solution to a lot of the societal problems that are happening. So one of the companies is like a fast food company, and as an example for that, the commercial is now you have the child, but she's an adult. But what ends up happening is there's actually a doll that she comes across. And then she picks up the doll and it brings back all memories about, her and all the times that she spent together with her grandma. And the really touching point about that was her grandma took the time to actually sew back, a missing part of the doll. So it was just kind of reliving, a lot of those moments where the grandma and now the adult that brings the adult back to the days when she was a child, that, more of the happy memories that came with the doll itself. And by associating those memories with the brand, then that's how that particular fast food brand can now become more time relevant, for example.
What is some of the things that you'll do or advise, or, what kind of products do you have in your company to, help the buying process? What are you trying to influence and how?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Sounds good. So the main thing is this understanding how the brain is structured and how information physically enters the brain. So the most important thing is, once again, so at the very base of the brain, you have the reptilian brain, right? Which is it's your physical brain. It's fast, reflexive, automatic, and it's pretty much responsible for your fight or flight responses. So information actually enters from the bottom of your brain stem. And then what ends up happening is it sends to your midbrain, which is responsible for dealing with emotions and social situations, right? And then what ends up happening is after that, the information actually ascends to the logical part of the brain, which is the cortex. And once again, that deals with more rational factors such as figures, data, and facts, for example. So the main important thing is the primal brain actually acts as a primitive filter for the logical part of the brain, because the logical part of the brain, or the cortex, it has consumed so much energy that if all the stimuli coming in, it would totally shut down the brain in total, right? So that's why the brain has to be very energy efficient, and the primal brain, since it acts as this primitive filter. So now as marketers, for example, how do we create content or core messaging that actually now, satisfies the primitive filters of the primal brain, so that it can send to the logical part of the brain for more like a holistic processing. And what's really unique about the primal brain is that's where the subconscious mind lives or resides, and that influences up to 95% of our decision making every single day, and that also includes our buying decisions.
So again, are there any examples that come to mind of a campaign for a product or a brand where they were marketing one way and you changed it and their marketing improved?
Yeah, absolutely. So all this right now, this on a general level, for neuromarketing, it's used to improve like things such as packaging. How does companies engage multiple senses so they become more memorable? Also for how do you improve product design as well? Obviously, how do you make ads and commercials more cost efficient and mitigate risks along the way? It's also used to allow brands to grab attention as well, and also for product placement and for more digital platforms like website designs, and for things like search engine optimization. Just one example is, for example, packaging. So, we have big companies that, for example, Pepsi or Frito-Lay's. One example there is they're looking to actually tap into the female market. And at that time, what their chips were actually packaged in a shiny style bag. And what they're finding is when they ran brain studies was that there was a part of the brain that was actually becoming highly active that was triggered whenever there's feelings of guilt so what was happening was now with the females, they were actually associating the Frito-Lay's chip brand with guilt. So that's why there was not many sales or the types of sales that they liked. So due to those brain studies, they actually changed their packaging from a shiny bag to one of a more beige but matte style finish. And then when they ran tests again, so these brain studies, what ended up happening was that they found that there's a considerable reduction in terms of brain activity in that specific area of the brain that would indicate, the association of their brand to the feelings of guilt. So by making that change of their packaging to more of a matte style finish, then that's what allowed them to enter that market more efficiently, because now, let's say, females are now perceiving that, Frito-Lay's is a much more positive and healthy alternative as a snack than when it was actually packaged in a shiny style bag. So that dramatically increased their sales and helped them to tap into the female market.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Another example.
Why would women feeling guilty? Why would the packaging do that?
Well, the thing is, the biggest thing was the shiny and the metallic of it. So that gives the impression that something is artificial. So this is the fact that the thought of putting something artificial into your body, then that's something that would create a lot of guilt behind, especially if they're looking for something that's more of a healthy alternative for a snack. So that's why
I see. So it looked more natural, so they felt like they're eating something healthier.
Exactly.
By the change in the packaging. Okay.
Exactly. So just imagine, more of a matte style bag. And like how you mentioned, it's like when we look at the things around us, trees, stuff like that, they're not really metallic and they're more, as you mentioned, more natural. So it's more associated now with this putting something in your body that's more light, first of all, and more natural. So as opposed to, putting something that's artificial into someone's body.
Any other good examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So another one is, Campbell's soup. So what they found was they were looking to redesign their soup label. So they ran, brain studies as well. And what they found was they need to make some changes. They had at that time a large spoon, but not really. So they had a large spoon, but not really in terms of the human presence of somebody there on the packaging was not as prominent. So they made the changes of, first of all, eliminating that the large spoon, adding a human face to the label and also adding aroma vapors. And what they found was by changing that packaging that it resulted in a 12% increase in their sales. So this is in the late 2000s, early in 2010s when this happened. And 12%, to a lot of people, that doesn't seem that much. But at that time, the yearly revenues that Campbell's Soup was doing was in close to $7 to $8 billion. So a 12% increase of that is, somewhere close to $1 billion in sales simply by making that packaging change due to, the neuromarketing. Pardon me?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's crazy.
Yeah, so that's just some of it. But I'll actually show you the other side where you have actually companies that use traditional styles of market research, such as like focus groups, surveys, and questionnaires. And they could have saved themselves a lot more money had they actually implemented neuromarketing research. Anything that involves like, EEG, such as putting a cap over the participant's scalp, and that would record and measure, brainwave patterns. One example is M&M, for example, they had a very popular Super Bowl ad that I believe they did in about 2018. And when they actually put it under the research in terms of seeing how consumers' brains would actually respond to their M&M, to the Super Bowl advertising, they found that in their 31 second advertising, that after the 20-second mark, so Danny DeVito, so at the very beginning you have two M&Ms and they're talking and they're walking down the street, And then one of the M&Ms actually turns into Danny DeVito. So Danny DeVito runs around and he's asking the people, would you eat me? Would you eat me? Would you eat me? And then he stands in the middle of the street, and because everyone's answering no, and you know how M&Ms, like, people, they love them, right? But as an M&M, you don't want to be eaten. So now you see Danny DeVito in the middle of the street, and he's this, he's just really happy because nobody wants to eat him because now, like, he's a human being. So nobody wants to eat a human being as opposed to an M&M. And the scene, what ends up happening is about the 20-second mark, a bus comes by and just absolutely, just knocks him out of the scene into a pile of, fruits and vegetables. And that's kind of like where everything peaked. But then 10 seconds after that, then what was very noticeable was engagement went down. So the main, thing to keep in mind is that 10 seconds is they could have found something more effective to use that time for. And that either they make it shorter or they just replace it with something that would be much more engaging. So that 10 seconds, I believe at that the Super Bowl, they're, roughly charging about $100,000 a second. So 10 seconds at $100,000 is $1 million, roughly, in that neighborhood that they could have saved or, use it to optimize had they actually done, let's say, either neuromarketing tests on it or, let's say, more efficient ways to test it. So, that's one example.
Does engagement mean that people are does engagement always positive, or does engagement not always correlate with buying?
Well, the thing, that's one factor in terms of engagement is always important, right? Because if people don't engage or consumers don't engage with the product, then it doesn't usually become top of mind as well. So they may not buy at that time, but the more associations and interactions that a consumer has with a brand, then the more likelihood that they're going to be primed to buy it in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. So what else do you look for besides engagement? What other factors? If you can't say, it's okay, but if you can, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously attention grabbing is absolutely huge because right now with everything that's happening, one of the main things is how do brands cut through all the noise, right? So especially as everything moves online, there's always, a million things competing for the consumer's attention. And, there's a saying or statistics that mentions that, the attention span for the average person now is less than a goldfish, right? Which is like less than 7 seconds. So, just less than like 50 years ago, it used to be 30 minutes because people used to listen to like radio shows for half an hour and still be able to maintain their attention during that time. So now, a real important piece of real estate, especially when it comes to marketing, is how do you grab attention and how do you keep it during the time that you have it. And, one important way to do that is what we call is orientation response. So really what that is, smooth pattern interruptions that happen to either break up repetition or repetitive thoughts, or just to allow, this allows smooth transitions from one scene to the next, especially when it comes to utilizing, let's say, video ads to to be in front of the consumer and get the core messaging in front. One of the ways is if we look at like Old Spice, they do a fantastic job. There's in one of their commercials, you have a gentleman and then he picks up the Old Spice, and then ends up happening is his background is he's just in his bathroom, for example. And as he continues talking, the background changes from, something that we would naturally associate, using at home, using your deodorant, but now he's on the beach. And the next thing he's at some, rodeo, like the background keeps on changing, but now because it's such a huge pattern interruption that most people, they don't associate the context of his background with the places that, where someone would wear deodorant. That's one way that also keeps the mind and the brain and the attention of the consumer always locked in. And the reason behind that is due to evolutionary biology, is that our brains are always scanning for new stimuli and to assess whether that new stimuli will, increase the chances of our survival and reproductive success. So that's why we're always looking for, back in the day, in our ancestral days, for example, stimuli that would be very important to them, for example, would be one, looking for new mates so that they could ensure the passing on with their genes, and also being able to come across new food sources, and then being able to assess, are these really safe, or is it a threat to me, or is there a non-threat? And the opposite is true as well, because when someone comes across a stranger, they're always one of the first things that come to mind is assessing whether this person's a safe person to talk to as well. So that same guidance system is actually applied to what catches our attention now in the marketing world. So that's why having these orientation responses or these kind of shifts in pattern interruptions always it forces the brain or causes the brain to kind of shift its kind of orientation point to reassess the situation. And that's what really keeps the brain captivated towards that particular piece of content.
So online versus TV, on a smartphone, what are some of the challenges there that are unique, that are different from TV or other media?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is screen size. There's totally different in terms of how you lay out the content on, let's say, a 5-6 inch screen versus, let's say, a 25 to 30 inch monitor, for example. Things to be cognizant about is how the brain, how the consumer actually scrolls through their phone versus scrolling down on a website, on the same website when they're looking online, especially online before. If, one of the popular trends for websites anyways was actually more of like a horizontal scrolling motion. And what was found through, brain studies was that it was not as efficient that a lot of people had thought it was. So this idea of thinking just that, that people would like to scroll left to right, and that's how they would come across new information, was less effective than just the traditional way of vertical, like how we would just scroll down on a website. And the reason why is the brain, with a scroll down motion, it's able to more easily anticipate that there's more content coming forward. Whereas the left and right motion is something that the brain can really comprehend. It was just a different way of absorbing and coming across information. So that was one of the big things when it comes with just, larger size screen. So if we apply that to now your phone, is how do you take content that fits on, let's say, a 30-inch screen and then make it digestible on a 6-inch screen? And a lot of that has to do with presenting things in terms of how the brain consumes information, which are usually in chunks of 3 or 4. So, just laying things out in pictures, if you have it, ideally, because the screen is a lot smaller, you just want pictures that are preferably larger, right? So, but you'd have them in kind of like sequences of 3, and then there would be some sort of, let's say, paragraph or something that would kind of be a break, and then you kind of repeat that over time. So, that's probably one of the main things in terms of how do you position content so that the consumer not only could view it, but it's also easily digestible as well to them.
Any examples of an ad or a commercial or a website that's just unbelievably successful, that's much better than any other you've seen, and why?
Oh, there's, I think one of them is, I think PayPal did a fantastic job, because with PayPal, the first thing that comes to mind is security. Everybody, when it comes to their finances, is the top priority is security and just being able to secure their money, right? So that's the number one thing. But however, when they found that as they're creating their ad and they're running brain studies in terms of how their consumers would respond to it, is they actually found that having ads that talk about speed and convenience was actually more powerful and more effective than the previous ads, or the initial thought that that security was should be the number one core or number one thing that they should talk about in terms of their core messaging when it came to PayPal. So I thought that was really neat, because with finances, that's what everyone thinks about, is how did they keep their resources secured, right? But it seems like the even factors that supersede that is how easy it is for someone to actually utilize that service, and the speed at which it executes those transaction ads seems to be is much more important. And once again, due to evolutionary biology, our brains, there's a reason for that too, because our brains are really hardwired to do really 3 things. One of them is for threat detection, and then the other 2 are more in line with what PayPal found out when they changed their messaging to speed and convenience, which is the brain is also hardwired to for energy efficiency. So it wants to make preferably decisions as easy and quick as possible, and also it likes things that it's able to process rapidly and with high speed. So that's something that PayPal, they found to change their core messaging to more focus on speed and convenience, which really helped them connect with their consumer base a lot better. Also, Cheetos was a very interesting one too. So what up in one of the commercials, they had actually a friend or a lady actually throw a handful of yellow Cheetos into white laundry, and then when they actually did just traditional types of research, and by that by doing a questionnaire and asking the participants how they felt about this commercial, the majority of the participants said that they just didn't agree with it, simply because of the fact that it's not nice to throw food into someone's laundry, especially when they're looking to clean it. But what they found when they actually did brain studies was that the areas of the brain actually activated, where they found the commercial really enticing, and a lot of that had to do with revealing hidden feelings that associate Cheetos with the thrill of doing something and being mischievous. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the mascot that Cheeto uses too, which is that cat with the sunglasses, right? So it was kind of neat to see that Cheetos just decided to hold off on that ad by listening to the answers that the participants gave them. Then that would have been something that would have been like a big marketing mistake, because that particular ad was really well received by the public. So that's some of the insights that some of the brain studies were able to tap into that made a big difference.
These results, is it still like, well, you just really never know, you have to test and ask, or can you figure it out without having to do all that?
Well, the thing is, there's not going to be like a silver bullet that's going to be able to anticipate everything beforehand, right? This is just neuromarketing is an addition or an evolution of to add on to the traditional way or the current ways of marketing. So it's a tool that now we could utilize into our full, let's say, toolkit. So of course you could use, companies still use traditional ways where they ask questionnaires and focus groups, but also by combining it with neuromarketing as well, or neuromarketing strategies. Is this a certain way to, increase the chances of something working? But the idea of, never ever testing something or something like that, I don't think that will go away, because there's no sure shot of what's going to happen. But this does increase the chances of gaining a deeper understanding of how the brand will be received by the consumer. I'll just give you like another example.
I was going to say, the closer you can get, the more excited you'll become. Ooh, it's working.
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah. Exactly. So if it takes you a step closer, then that's always a move in the right direction, right?
No, that's true. Well, what's the example you wanted to give, the last one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the biggest things was mitigating the risk of rolling a product line out without really getting a deep understanding how consumers will receive it, right? Or potentially receive it. One of it was Chrysler, for example. In one of their car lines, they're at that time thinking of going with more of a type of look when it comes to their headlights. So before they actually rolled it out in full force, what they did was they ran, brain studies to see how their consumers would receive it. And what they found was actually that they initially thought of implementing the more sleek style was going to be something that's going to be very that's going to connect well with their audience group. However, through those brain studies, they found that a more kind of like a human or humanoid shape, so almost like like a human head or human eyeball, for example, or something that's an element that resembles like a human being, is something that actually in the brains of the participants was much more attractive. So it started to actually activate when the participants saw the changed headlights to more be similar to a humanoid shape. Then the reward networks or pathways within the brain, more specifically the nucleus accumbens, which is like the area of the brain responsible for like dopamine and so forth, became a lot more activated. So that was a strong indication that the more humanoid style for the headlights is something that the consumer will be much more gravitated towards. So that saved Chrysler millions and millions of dollars of producing or rolling out that specific line of cars, how they just went with their initial inclination and thought that the slick style of headlights would resonate with their consumers. So once again, that mitigates risk significantly during that time. Very similar to, you know, the M&M commercial. If they, let's say that for those last 10 seconds, if they found ways to make it either more engaging or maybe just totally remove it, for example, then they would have found, you know, certain ways to optimize that $100,000 a second into something that, you know, would be much more effective for them in that respect.
Yeah, very good. Well, Felix, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work and potentially become a customer? Where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the founder of the neuromarketing company, Happy Buying Brain. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So that's the best place to find me. You know, I'm more than happy to connect with people on there. Just type in Felix Cao. The second way is to connect on the website. I publish blogs, you know, on a regular basis. And one way to keep up to date in terms of what's happening in the world of neuromarketing and how could that help your business is to subscribe to the blog. And the third way is also through, let's say, the contact form as well. So those three ways would be the best way to contact me. But LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn is the best way to keep that conversation going.
Well, very good. Felix, thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on your podcast, Richard. I definitely appreciate it as well.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.